Welcome back to AFGE's Inside Government, available on demand at InsideGovernmentRadio.com. We've been joined by one of our very good friends here, Bob Weiner, former Clinton White House spokesman as well as a national Democratic strategist. Bob, welcome back to the program.
It's such a pleasure to be with you, Jason. You are the most substantive of all the radio people that are in this huge building, and so I really enjoy talking with you periodically.
I appreciate that, Bob. And, of course, this huge building is the Time Warner Cable Arena at the Democratic National Convention. Tell me what you're doing here and how many hats are you possibly wearing this week?
Well, I'm a surrogate for the president and for the campaign, and was on Fox and Friends yesterday taking the punchings, but punching back, I think, about as hard as they were trying to punch me, and we can talk about that. It was a lot of fun. And doing some radio. I also am running the Daily Press briefing room for the convention. And it's a bit exhausting to do both, but I'm having a lot of fun because this is an opportunity to get a great message out.
Tell our listeners, our audience, what happens in this Daily Press briefing room. I don't think many people know the ins and outs of what goes on there.
Well, the first day was an open news conference with 20 cameras and 200 media, all on the message and the logistics of the convention, going over the podium schedule of the speakers, which today, for example, are going to range right through Michelle Obama, and then tomorrow include President Clinton, and then, of course, President Obama and Vice President Biden the final day, and then a whole host of actors and leaders in the party and up-and-comers like Elizabeth Warren and so forth. So it's a great convention to spotlight rising and current Democratic stars and the issues and the platform that we talked about today in the press briefing that is extremely important, shows the difference between the Democrats going middle out and the Republicans going top down, which caused the crash in the first place, let alone the women's choice and self-deportation and cutting student loans and all the other issues that they would be a disaster, cutting Medicare and Social Security. But their philosophy of top-down instead of middle-out is a disaster for Americans.
Explain what you mean by top-down versus middle-out. Give our listeners a sense for what that means and what the impact is on their lives.
It's direct impact. Top-down is trickle-down, and everybody knows that trickle-down is what Herbert Hoover did, which means tax breaks for the rich and benefits for the rich, thinking they will create jobs. Didn't work for Herbert Hoover, and hey, it worked real well under the Bush administration, causing the crash. And unfortunately, the Democrats compromised and included in the stimulus 40% of it is tax cuts, and we've agreed to the tax cut philosophy, and it hasn't worked real well even now. So trickle-down is not the way to go, and that's top-down, thinking that the rich will create jobs instead of investing their money in the residuals of their company and buying yachts and getting putting their money in offshore bank accounts in the Caymans and the Bahamas and making tons of money for themselves. It doesn't work. It's proven that it doesn't work, and we keep hearing how you got to help the job creators. Well, of course you do, except the job creators are the people who do the work. Those are the job creators. And Democrats who've done people programs have had a 5.5% GDP growth, 5.5% under Democratic presidents since Hoover. Since Hoover, Republican presidents with their tax breaks philosophy, 1.5% GDP growth. That's an op-ed I did, Jason, in the Miami Herald. So it's case closed, proven that the tax breaks for the rich and the philosophy of trickle-down and top-down is a disaster for the American economy, for American workers, and for the people of America who have the programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, food stamps, student loans, and housing and everything else that matters in our country, and infrastructure and our bridges, which 40% are unsafe now. We're not doing them because of top-down, the rich have the money.
One of the things that you mentioned here was people who do the work, which reminds me very, very much of AFGE members who are federal and D.C. government employees in federal service, something that you know about spending a good part of your career as a federal employee.
Well, I've loved my federal service, and yes, we do the work, we do public service. Federal employees are just denigrated and criticized and used as punching bags, and it really bothers me because, as you know, Jason, with all the wonderful members of your union, federal employees are dedicated and chose that career and know, by the way, that you're making a lot less than you would make in the private sector doing the same job if you were in business. But we've chosen to give in public service. And I've worked for some great people, for Claude Pepper, Ed Koch, Ted Kennedy, Charlie Rangel, although I hide a little bit under my desk with his ethics problems, but he's always fought for the poor and the oppressed. John Conyers, and in the Clinton administration, Lee Brown, Barry McCaffrey. So I've had the real privilege of working for some incredible national leaders, and to me, it's a travesty when any federal employee or elected official suddenly becomes a money-motivated person and takes some kind of a bribe. That is a rare breed of some kind that does that, because most of the people, and I did the exception of Rangel, who didn't have a sense. He got into arrogance somewhat. But they've been so dedicated to helping people, and that's the whole reason for their public service lives.
And dedicated to something that is much, much bigger than themselves.
That's right.
That reflects their attitudes on their country and their fellow countrymen. And I think of a situation, really, we're sitting right next to here, your lovely wife, Pat, who has done a phenomenal job.
Right, Dr. Patricia Berg, for those who need to know.
and a lot of research to help people live better, healthier lives.
She's a cancer researcher. We're so proud of her, discovering a gene activated in 80% of women with breast cancer, 70% of men with prostate cancer, trying to discover, she's working on it, and close to a blood test, working on a suppressor. Grants from Avon, Komen, DOD, NIH, and the Susan Love Foundation, and a host of others that help her because they recognize her work. And she's been on CNN, Washington Post, New York Times as a spokesperson, and had 16 cameras at her news conference announcing her discovery, more than Dick Cheney had in the same hospital that Pat's a professor at when he was sick. So we're very proud of Pat. But, the point about public service is I am disgusted at the Republicans now who don't make it about government and the country, and they make it about, as Mitch McConnell, the Senate leader, said, about obstructing the President of the United States. What kind of an attitude is that? I go through when I've been in the White House and Congress on Social Security, Medicare. You study them, and I did a piece in Roll Call that it just so bothers me that instead of the 60 to 90 opposition votes that we always used to get, that now you get zero despite the compromises. And the myth, for example, of Obama's not compromising on the health care bill when he gave 160 amendments to the Republicans, including small business tax breaks, and doing it through the private sector instead of as a single payer bill. That was a compromise, doing it through the private sector instead of the far better way that other countries do of a single payer. So we compromised in order that people have the benefits, but we did not get any support whatsoever from Republicans. So that's what public service should be, by the way, is bipartisanship and working together, and it's unfortunately not happening now.
These issues of the Affordable Care Act, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, these are issues that you're very well versed in, and you've spent a lot of time researching. Tell me how the Affordable Care Act changes an everyday middle-class average American.
Well, the great Claude Pepper, who was my chairman when I was the chief of staff of the House Aging Committee, would roll over in his grave if he saw the cuts that are being proposed in Social Security and Medicare now, because they have both stopped poverty among the seniors. 50% of poverty is stopped by Social Security, and 25% of it is stopped by Medicare. If you cut those programs, you voucherize it, you make them pay $6,000 more, you raise the age of eligibility. Any way you want to cut the program and call it reform. It's not reform. It's cutting, slicing, and dicing the programs and stopping health care. You are adding to poverty in America, and you'll have to pay at the other end of it for health care, for emergency services, for food stamps, for housing, every which way. Because, by the way, half of all bankruptcies are caused from a health care illness in this country. Half. And so it's the largest cause of bankruptcy that we have in America.
You actually bring up a very good point about paying for it on the back end or
That's
paying
right.
for it later. I don't think that a lot of people really consider that. Looking at a situation, you might look at it in the short term, but you're saying, hey, take a look at it through the entire life cycle
That's right.
of it.
I have an op-ed, and I hope our listeners go to my website, weinerpublic.com, WEINER public.com. I'm very open. I put everything up there, including, if you click on op-eds, all the op-eds. In the Tallahassee Democrat, Medicare cuts will cost the nation. A huge headline that they made of it across the whole top of the paper in one of Florida's top 5 papers. And so I'm very aggressive about that issue, and I make the point all the time. And the same thing is true on Social Security. You start tampering with cutting Social Security benefits, and you're going to start having to pay for all those other programs, because that's an insurance. And by the way, seniors have paid into it, and it's solvent for 30 more years. And it's a myth to say there's no Social Security surplus. There is for 30 years and counting. There have already been 15 individual years since 1965 where Social Security has had a temporary deficit, and it's been picked up by the trust fund. There's no trust fund? Yes, there is. The seniors have paid their insurance premiums into the federal government. It's like any other bank. Try telling a bank, oh, we've used your money for other programs. Sorry, we won't give it to you. Try that sometime. It's under law that the federal government owes you the money and has to make up the difference even if there's a shortage in the Social Security benefit for one single year. For example, which they did a stupid thing of cutting the payroll tax takes it out of Social Security. But the law at least says that the federal government has to make that up.
You're listening to AFGE's Inside Government, and we're here with Bob Weiner, former Clinton White House spokesman and a national Democratic strategist. Bob, on this issue of Social Security, tell me what you think happens to the standard of living in this country if Social Security is either cut or just simply dissolved.
Well, I want to point out that it's very important, Jason, that people not listen to the rhetoric of when the Republicans say we're reforming Social Security, we're reforming Medicare, they mean cut. Translate reform to cut. Translate reform to kill so the program is not what you know. Education has to happen here. It's completely a myth when they say, we're protecting Social Security by the Republicans. It's a lie. Their campaign has been built on a tripod of lies. They are cutting Social Security. And that means if they cut Social Security and Medicare, you go back to the days, literally, when you had 75% of seniors in poverty and they went to trash cans and ate dog food. That actually is what happened before the New Deal in the Great Depression. And if we want to do that, go cut seniors' programs. Where are they going to go for their meals, for often their very basic housing that they've moved into because they've already sold their home? Where are they going to go?
Who's out there advocating on behalf of seniors?
I will say Democrats more than Republicans in the generic, but I also put an op-ed out saying we need Claude Pepper's courage now. When he was the chairman of the House Aging Committee, Juanita Krebs, who was the Carter administration, Pepper didn't care which party, Commerce Secretary, said, oh, we ought to raise the age maybe from 65 to 67. And Pepper looked at that and he said, over my dead body. And he rolled in Jim Burke, who was the chairman. Pepper was the chairman of the Aging Committee. Jim Burke was the chairman of the Social Security Subcommittee. And we traipsed over to Juanita Krebs's office. And Pepper said to her, I will fight this to the death. And Burke said, so will I. And Juanita Krebs then said, oh, it wasn't a real proposal anyway. It was just a thought. And that's how you do it. We need that courage now. President Obama has been very good. He has said that Social Security does not have a short-term deficit. I actually raised the question in a White House news conference to Jack Lew, and he said his response, because I was trying to get him to get to the point of saying that there's no short-term benefit, it's only a long-term minor problem. And that's what he said. President Obama had a news conference the next day, and apparently Jack Lew had briefed him and said the very same thing. So we've got the president saying exactly the right thing. What you have the Republicans saying is cut now, cut now. And they're also saying we're not going to cut seniors. We're only going to cut people under 55. Well, that's ages to the hilt in creating an age warfare, but it's also nonsense because, first of all, do you think Granny doesn't want her grandson to have the same Social Security she does? Of course she does. That's number one. Number two is because they want to cut Obamacare, they call it, which now President Obama has taken as a pride factor. Great, he did it. He brought in covering seniors' drugs, the donut hole, the between $2,500 and $4,500 unexplainable gap that they used to have to pay. Now they will have covered, in addition to lifetime benefits, so that when they get cancer, your insurance company doesn't drop you, so that your kids can be on your plan until they're age 26, and then you have preventive care. And by the way, the insurance companies have to provide 80% of what they take in as benefits, not profit to them. They're only entitled to 20% profit, so that now people are getting $500 checks from their insurance companies saying that we're required by President Obama's new health care law to give you this check because we charged you too much. And when I talked to an airline attendant who I was talking to about the provisions of the bill, who had thought the bill was bad, and when I explained what the provisions of the bill were, the airline attendant said, gee, that's a good bill. If I knew what's in the bill, I could support it. Well, that's the point. It's national health insurance that helps the people of America for the first time get to where other countries were.
As we close out here, I know you have a couple of other shows to do, but I want to get one last thing from you. Are you having just as much fun this time as you did the first time you've been here?
I am, and I love it, and I really appreciate your having me on. We've had a lot of fun, Jason. I really appreciate your having me on, and thank you so much.
Bob Weiner, our good friend, former Clinton White House spokesman, as well as a national Democratic strategist. Bob, always great to have you on the program.
Thanks, Jason.